Okay, everybody, what we want to do today is talk about the top 10 mistakes that people make when giving a presentation and then how to avoid them. And as you can see up here, one of them is not making a spelling error, but I thought that would be a good point to say that there's a lot of mistakes that people make. I thought about naming this the top 10 ways to give a bad presentation, but none of us like to hear something from a negative standpoint. Okay, so what's interesting about today's presentation is we're going to talk about two different places where people actually make mistakes. There are actually two parts, and we're going to go into a lot of detail on that. And the mistakes that people are making are intuitive. They're the ways that you would think that people would make that you would give a presentation, but actually it's not. We're going to talk about that. What I'd like to do, though, is first let's talk about, from your perspective, what do you think are the top 10 mistakes that people make? I want you to write those down if you've got a minute here, and then as you think about it, what we're going to do is put up with your list and then compare your list with my list. So let's take a minute here. Okay, those are all excellent. I'm not telling you that mine are the only ones or the right ones. What we're going to do is at the end of this presentation come back and see how did my list compare to your list. Does that seem fair? I mentioned earlier that there's two different places that people make mistakes. Oddly, 50% of mistakes that people make are going to be made before they actually give the presentation. Let me repeat that. 50% are going to be made. The mistakes are going to be made before you ever actually stand up in front of a group. That's pretty incredible. That's an enormous amount. And then the second percentage are those that are actually made while giving a presentation. So now I'm going to go through my top 10. My number one is little, if any, advanced preparation. That's the first part of number one. And then the second part of that is practice, practice, practice. I've talked about this before. What most people do when they're going to give a presentation, and a lot of what I'm going to be talking about is a sales pitch today. If somebody's going to give a presentation, the first thing they do is they pull out the previous presentation that they used on somebody else and then begin to modify that presentation and spend most of their time then changing that presentation. And then if there's any rehearsal at all, what do you think that rehearsal is limited to? How many times do you think most people practice a presentation, sales presentation? Once. That's exactly right. Most people practice it once. And if you think about it, how well do you probably know a presentation if all you practice is one time? Going back to that list over there. That means you're not going to know the sequence of that presentation very often. That's when you're going to see a lot of people looking back a lot because they don't really know that presentation. The second part of that is practice, practice, practice. The best way to know a presentation is by practicing it. That's how you hone that. You see comedians go out on the road and they hone a presentation by getting out there and practicing, see what works. Second one, and y'all have already hit on that, is making a presentation that is me-focused. When people hire me to come in and work with them on a presentation, the first thing that they say when I sit down with them is they say, now what is it we want to focus on? What do we want to accomplish out of the presentation? Remember, when you're giving a presentation, people are thinking about one thing, the WIIFM. What's in it for me? That's the people sitting in the audience. What's in it for the people that you're giving the presentation to? One of the best ways to make sure that your audience focused is by doing this. When you first sit down, back in the planning stage, is to think about the one question, what is it they want to accomplish by our presentation? What does the audience want? What does that company want? What is that municipality that we're pitching to? What is it that they want to accomplish during our presentation? And at a minimum, make sure your presentation does that. And then, of course, secondly, you do want to sprinkle in then what is it that you want to accomplish during that presentation. So it's a twofold, but it starts with what they want to accomplish. It begins with making sure that you have their agenda, not just yours. Next on that list is a lack of clarity and structure. How many times have you gone to and heard a presentation, and as you're walking out, you go, I have no idea what he or she is talking about? Anybody ever have that experience? Or you'll go to church or your synagogue, and you'll be walking out to the car afterwards, and somebody will say, that was a good sermon. And you go, I can't remember what they talked about. If you can't remember what somebody talked about in the presentation, I guarantee you there's a lack of structure that's going on. The best way to make sure that you have structure is to do what we hear people talk about: have an opening, a body, and a close. Every presentation ought to have an opening, a body, and a close. And we teach in this program a lot is that you ought to practice the 3 T's. And the 3 T's are: tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. If you'll force yourself to do that on 95% of your presentations, your message will hit home. You'll force yourself to have structure if you force yourself into the 3 T's. And sometimes it'll feel, and I'm talking about which is counterintuitive, you feel like you're giving a presentation, and it's almost like you're dealing at a preschool if you go that low at a level. Trust me, that's the level that people need when you're giving a presentation. They need that structure.